Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together real loud for Atabex Lugo-Thomas.
Thank you. A couple months ago, it was July, and I was sitting in the dining room having a conversation with my husband. I was having an anniversary of sorts, 40 years living in Detroit. I jokingly asked him, do you think I could file a lawsuit 40 years later for kidnapping? Because that's how I feel. I feel like I was kidnapped by my own mother. July 1979. I was 6 years old living with my family in Puerto Rico. My brother and I, we were out in the neighborhood and we came home and we saw all our luggage packed by the front door. Mami, ¿dónde vamos? Where are we going? Vamos a visitar a tu abuela in Detroit. We're going to visit your grandmother in Detroit, she said. That was a surprise to us because she hadn't mentioned anything about this trip. So, we were excited because we were about to get on the plane. What little kid doesn't want to go on a plane? And we remembered our first visit to Detroit. We had so much fun. But I still remember the first time my grandmother said that we were going to Metro Beach. I was like, I didn't know they had beaches in Detroit. So I was looking forward to seeing this beach, but when I got there, I was so disappointed. There was nowhere I could go eat a pastelillo, una capuria. I couldn't go and get a malta, un coco frio to drink. I love going and picking up seashells along the water, and one of my favorite things to do is to sleep in a hammock under the palm trees. Metro Beach, it was nothing like that. My mother said we were leaving right away. We just couldn't understand, what was the rush? Why hadn't she told us? But most importantly, why wasn't Papi, our father, coming with us? We must have asked about our father, but we didn't get to see him or anyone before we left. We just left. What my brother and I didn't know was that would be the last time we would see Puerto Rico and our family for 10 years. My mother, Mommy, Elizabeth Ibiyeme Diane Matlock, she was born in Cleveland, Ohio. My papi, my father, Andres Adelabu Lugo Dupré, he was born in Arroyo, Puerto Rico. They just happened to both be living in New York City in the 60s, and that's how they met and married in less than 6 months. They were both a part of revolutionary groups like the Young Lords and the Republic of New Africa. My grandmother, Eloise, she later changed her name to Khadija. She was married to a Jewish attorney in New York City, and he ended up being the defense attorney for Rafael Vieira in the New Bethel incident in Detroit. So in 1969, they left New York and moved to Detroit. And that same year, my mother and my father, they left New York and moved to Puerto Rico. And that's where my brother and I were born. My brother, Adelabu, he goes by Alex now, he was born in 1970, and I was born in 1972. My birth name is Atabex Lugo Matlock. I was always told about my birth name because it is kind of different. Atabex is from the Taino people, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico. It means Earth Mother. My family, we lived in Bayamon, which is about 20 minutes from San Juan if you've been to the island. And we were all very close. We did everything together, but I was too little to notice that my mother and father, they weren't getting along anymore. I don't remember a lot about my childhood, but one vivid memory I do have is my mother and my father. They were physically fighting in the cobblestone streets of Old San Juan. My brother and I were in the back seat of the car, and we were crying, and we were screaming for them to stop. And then my father, he jumped in the car and he drove off. I couldn't believe he left her. My mother walked all the way home that night. It took her hours. I remember it wasn't too long after that we found ourselves going to visit my grandmother in Detroit. Moving to Detroit was a culture shock for me because Detroit was nothing like Puerto Rico. My grandmother in Detroit, she didn't speak any Spanish, and she would get pissed off when we spoke Spanish around her. She would say, "Stop speaking Spanish, you know I don't understand, speak English." We didn't want to upset her, so we said, well, we better learn English. But at that time, it was 1979, and Detroit Public Schools, they didn't have bilingual education program like they do now, and there weren't English second language classes everywhere. But my mother and my grandmother, they found a school that was near us. We lived on Sorrento, 6 Mile Lodge, and the closest school to us that had a bilingual classroom was Houghton Elementary. But it wasn't really a classroom. It was the size of a large utility closet. And my brother and I were in there with about 10 other children. We all were from different parts of the world. We all spoke different languages, all in different grades, trying to learn English. I couldn't wait to get out of that room. And when I went into what they call the regular second grade class, I had the thickest accent. They couldn't understand me, and I didn't know what they were saying. It was frustrating for everybody. The next year, we ended up moving down by Eastern Market. We lived in McDonald Square. So I went to Duffield Elementary. And it was at Duffield that I had a change. I mean, it was a change for me because, before then, people really didn't try to help me. But my teacher, my third grade teacher, Mr. Cunningham, he recognized that I was having difficulty pronouncing a lot of words in English. So one day he just said, "Let's close the lesson. Let's not even do it." And him and the entire class, they ended up helping me to learn how to pronounce words in English. I'll never forget Mr. Cunningham for that. The next year, 4th grade, I went to a new school, Detroit Public School for the Gifted and Talented. It was later renamed Bates Academy. It was at Bates that I felt like I was coming into my own. I was finally feeling like I could kind of speak English better, even though I was still pronouncing everything a little bit wrong. It was at Bates, too, that I developed my love for dance. We had a teacher, Miss White, and she was one of those people that just exuded dance, and she wanted to make sure that we knew how powerful dance could be. And she started her dance company and her dance academy with students from Bates Academy. So I was a founding member of Detroit Windsor Dance Company. It was also at Bates that I ended up finding a group of friends that I'm still friends with to this day, and we call ourselves the family. And I would meet the boy that would eventually become the love of my life, Jamal Thomas. After Bates, I went to Cass Technical High School. It was at Cass, though, that I had another life-changing event. My brother and I, we were like two peas in a pod. We did everything together, including getting in trouble. My mother had had enough. So my grandmother and my mother came up with a bright idea They decided to send us back to our father. That was 1988. It was weird because I don't even know if he really knew we were even coming, because I was on the plane and then she called him and said, you can pick her up at whatever time it was. When I left out that airport, I didn't even know who to look for. I didn't know what my father looked like. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. I remember when I walked out and finally connected with him, that he whispered in my ear and said, I knew who you were immediately because you looked like your mother. Being home was weird. My father had a new family. My brother and I felt like he had forgotten about us and he was replacing us. My father threw away all of the photo albums that my mother left behind. I was hoping to see those pictures because I don't have that many pictures of me as a little girl, and I wanted to see what I looked like. I also wanted to see the things that we did, because my mother took pictures like I do, if anybody knows me. I take a lot of pictures. So I was really disappointed that those pictures were gone. But I was also very angry because I was like, who doesn't see their children in 10 years? One of the things that probably hurt me the most was that because they had been so long and I left when I was so little, I couldn't speak Spanish anymore. And I couldn't speak to my abuela. I couldn't have a conversation with her. Mi abuela, Dominga Duprey Rivera. I had never forgotten her or mi abuelo. His name is Atabex Lugo. He died before we left Puerto Rico. But we spent so much time with them. And it hurt me that I couldn't have a conversation with her. So I decided right then and there that I had to learn Spanish again. And I did. I'm still not 100% fluent, but I get by. When I was in Puerto Rico, I felt like I was finally around my people. Hearing the Puerto Rican music around me, being able to eat that Puerto Rican food, because it's hard to forget the taste and the smell of Puerto Rican food. But I felt like I was home, in spite of being gone for so long. Now, I was sent back to stay. My mother was like, you staying? But I was like, no, I'm not. Because I was like, I'm graduating from Cass Tech. So that whole summer, my grandmother kept asking me when she was on the phone with me. She was like, oh, what high school are you going to? I said, Cass Tech. And she was like, oh, I didn't know they had a Cass Tech in Puerto Rico. So I had to secretly get my grandfather, Norman Matlock, to help me. He lived in Harlem in New York City, so I got him to buy me a ticket from Puerto Rico to New York. I spent a few weeks with him, and then he got me a ticket from New York to Detroit. I just showed up one day. I'm home. My mother and my grandmother didn't know I was coming. Of course, I got in a little trouble for that, but hey, I got here and I did graduate from Cass Tech in 1990. After I graduated from Cass, I went to Michigan State University. And when I got to Michigan State, I decided to really start researching my genealogy. I wanted to learn a little bit more who I was. I know now all of the DNA that passes through me, there's a mixture. I have a Puerto Rican heart with Detroit soul. I call myself Detroit Boricua because that perfectly describes who I am. Detroit Boricua, B-O-R-I-C-U-A. That is the name, the indigenous name of Puerto Ricans. Because before the colonizers came and renamed our island, Puerto Rico was called Borinquen. So knowing your history is so important. because there's not just one little piece of you. There's a lot of pieces of your family tree that make you who you are. Now, I came back, and I was a different person. I got to know my family better than I ever thought I would. I went to Puerto Rico as often as I could. Pretty much every time I got any kind of break, I went to Puerto Rico. And I developed a really close relationship with mi abuela. I came back, I was different, but I still loved being here in Detroit. I had my family here, I had my friends here, I was working, so I was good. Then, in the last few years, things changed for me. I became the caregiver for my grandmother, Khadija Shelby. She had Alzheimer's and needed someone to care for her. She passed away in January 2018. That move, when she moved to Detroit in 1969, that actually put her in a circle of influential Detroiters, and she's friends with a lot of people who are featured in this museum. Two of her closest friends were Dr. Wright and Coleman Young. That experience of caring for someone with Alzheimer's is something I'll never forget. I know more about probate court than I ever cared to know. The kicker is that now my mother is planning to move back to Puerto Rico. Yeah. The place she took me from. I feel a certain kind of way about it. You know, I told my husband that morning after we were talking, well, I guess she didn't really kidnap me, but she did take me away from everything that I knew and everyone that I loved. But you know what? If one thing was different, everything would be different. I wouldn't have my three little brothers, Andres, Luis, and James. I wouldn't have my girlfriends in the family, my mochas. I wouldn't have my longtime friend, Frankie. And I wouldn't have my husband, Jamal, and our three girls, Jamela, Karima, and Anaya. So that's why I had to be here. After all of this, and a little bit more for another time, I stand here before you, Angela Atabex Lugo-Thomas. I know who I am. Yo soy Detroit Boricua, pa que tú lo sepas. I am Detroit Boricua, just so you know.
Atabex Angela Lugo-Thomas.